Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining for the first in our semester two series of the Science, Health, Data Communication Research Centre speaker series. I'm Julian McDougall. I'm the chair for today's presentation, and that will simply involve introducing our guest speaker and then sharing the conversation that we have towards the end of our hour. So it's my pleasure to introduce Christine Maggs, who is today's speaker, who will be speaking about the sustainable exploitation of seaweeds and kind of news coverage and so on. Relate this to our concerns in the research centre. Christine studied botany at Oxford, and her PhD in Galway was on the ecology underwater calcified seaweeds. Following postdoctoral fellowships, Christine lectured in marine biology at Queen's University Belfast, becoming professor of study of algae. I'm going to ask you to pronounce that because I'm reading off a screen and it's not my area of expertise. It says ecology?
We call it phycology.
Ecology.
Comes from the Greek for foukos.
Right.
But phycology is what we say.
Thank you. Probably better to ask than pretend and try it myself. Thank you. As head of school, she led on Athena Swan initiatives for gender equality and then moved to Bournemouth University as Dean of SciTech, Science and Technology, in 2015, since when she became Chief Scientist of the UK's Joint Nature Conservation Committee. Christine is currently a non-executive director of Ocean Harvest, which makes a blended seaweed ingredient for improving the health of farmed livestock. So thanks so much for giving us your time today, Christine, and I will give you the Zoom space for your talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I'm going to do, because I want to share my presentations with you, and then you probably won't be able to see me. So I'm going to start off by just showing you a few seaweeds so that we're all on the same Skype. So the biggest seaweeds that are around our waters, Britain and Ireland, are the kelps. And we've got two particularly large and common species of kelp. This one is called Laminera hyperborea, which means it comes from the far north, and it's got a stiff stalk that holds up like that. And then a similar but importantly different species is this one called Laminera digitata, and this one's got a completely flexible stipe, and it has got long fronds, very long, and they wash around in the water. And the significance of all of this is that the environment in which the seaweeds are found means they need to have special ingredients in them to make them slippery, so they don't get damaged in the environment in which they're living. So that is the basis of why seaweeds are so valuable for industry. And in addition to those seaweeds, which are called kelps, I've got here some of the intertidal ones, and these are called racks. This one here is called egg rack, or to those of us who work in seaweeds, this is called Ascophyllum nodosum. And you're going to hear a lot more about Ascophyllum nodosum. Right, so I'm just going to clean my hands off slightly, and then hopefully I will be able to share my presentation with you, and you, all being well. We tested this earlier, so it should be fine. So that should be going to, if I go into my presentation mode, you'll shout to me, Julian, if this doesn't work. Oh, what's that?
Yep, you are now sharing, and that is perfect. That's in full screen.
Is it?
Right.
Okay. That's full screen,
It was full screen, now it isn't. So if you just reverse the process to where you were before.
If I throw that away, what happens now? Let's look. How's that? Yeah, good. All right, fantastic. And I can actually see a few people, so that's really nice. So what I've joined the meeting for today is to tell you about reconciling marine conservation and sustainable seaweed exploitation. So these are two, there's a bit of a tension here between, we want to use the seaweeds. I've already told you They have got all sorts of very valuable things in them for industry, food, and so on. But at the same time, they're extremely important in the natural environment because they form a habitat and an ecosystem. So everywhere you go at the moment, you see seaweeds being promoted as valuable and innovative. I've just mentioned this. This is down on the Underground in London, Piccadilly Circus, and it's showing a seaweed here in a lab, and the company is called Notpla, growing the business as fast as the seaweed used to make their packaging. I have to say, I was a little bit suspicious when I saw this. It's a spin-off from UCL, by the way, but they don't use that seaweed in their packaging. And in fact, they probably don't use any British seaweeds in their packaging at all. But anyway, that sets the scene, and how much we see seaweeds everywhere, even in Private Eye, the satirical magazine. It's because they were mocking the example where the Daily Express always has the same headline every year, which is Blizzard of the Century. Well, this time there actually was a blizzard of the century. They were so shocked that they said, now that this has happened, we're looking forward to being able to report the miracle seaweed cure that will be the cure for arthritis, and eating dark chocolate will actually prevent dementia. So that's how much seaweeds are part of the environment in the media. So I wanted to put this current interest in seaweeds and their exploitation into the context of marine conservation, and use a legislative framework as the context to see whether this can actually be sustainable, the exploitation. So this is a picture from on the left. I don't know if you could you see my cursor, Julian, or not? No.
Move it again. I don't think so. Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, great. So this is a picture I took from the internet in California, and this is a dish showing cooking a recipe for sea palm, and they've called it "We Love Sea Palm." Well, some of us love the plant known as the sea palm, or the seaweed known as the sea palm, which is Postelsia palmiformis, and it cannot be sustainably harvested. So I'm just using this as a contrast between what the view might be of the public, which is it's a delicious dish, and the fact that it is not sustainably harvestable, and it's really quite rare in California. Amazing species. So the international law background to all of this is immensely complex. Mike Elliott in University of Hull here, he mapped out the marine legislation and he called it a horrendogram. And in here, you've got international laws and commitments, then you've got the EU strategies and directives, then you've got the target, then you've got the primary legislation, and then what actually happens. So this is an extraordinarily difficult and complex set of legislation. And this complexity is often cited by the industry as a cause of the delays and the failures in marine enterprises, that they have to battle through all this stuff in order to actually do anything. And if we look at a simpler version of this, it's still quite complicated. And in the center, you've got the international law commitments and these conventions, and then the protections around the outside. And I'm going to mention particularly OSPAR, which is the Oslo and Paris Convention, but you'll recognize many of these, I'm sure, such as ICES, the Kyoto Protocol, the Espoo Convention, Bern Convention. So these are very well-known conventions. In fact, they're so well known, these relevant in multilateral environmental agreements, that they were developed over many decades. So, for example, Ramsar Convention started in 1971, World Heritage 1972, CITES 1973, Convention on Migratory Species, 79, and the Berne Convention also dates back to 1979. So these have developed over a very long period of time, and they've come together and in the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is an legally binding treaty that commits governments worldwide to safeguard biodiversity. And it covers all life on Earth, from ecosystems to microorganisms, and it focuses on achieving sustainable development, that is, to support human progress, but without threatening biodiversity. So that is their definition of sustainable development. So it was signed in Rio, known as the Rio Convention, signed in Rio in 1992, and it entered into force in December 1993. So that's basically, this CBD is the convention. It's what everything else depends on, really. And nowadays we also have the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to structure my consideration of sustainable exploitation of seaweeds around the 23 targets of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was agreed at COP to be achieved by 2025. Their success, sorry, I can't read that, 20 whatever. I'm going to just, by 2030. So these are the successor to the 20 Aichi targets, which actually were mostly unmet. And these are the 4 of those targets that I'm going to talk about. Don't worry, I won't go into huge detail on each of them, and there are some overlapping elements. So target 3 is to conserve 30% of land, waters, and seas. Target 5 is to ensure sustainable, safe, and legal harvesting and trade of wild species. Target 9, manage wild species sustainably to benefit people. And target 10 is to enhance biodiversity and stability in agriculture, aquaculture. I'm going to be talking briefly about aquaculture. So target 3, as I said, it is to conserve 30% of land, waters, and seas by 2030. So it's known as 30 by 30, especially areas of particular importance for biodiversity. And what there must be is protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, which I've explained below here. It's a difficult concept. And we have to ensure that sustainable use, if there is appropriate sustainable use, is fully consistent with conservation outcomes. And underpinning all of it is recognizing and respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities, including over their traditional territories. So this is, we have to see 30% of land and 30% of water conserved and protected in this way. Now, in the United Kingdom, already 37% of waters are currently within the MPAs. And the network is ecologically coherent under OSPAR, which is what I mentioned earlier, that convention of the Oslo and Paris Convention. So this ecologically coherent network in the North Atlantic. In England and Wales, DEFRA has set an interim target of 48% of the MPA designated features to be in favourable condition by January 2028. So that's quite a tall order. The 37% of our waters are covered here. This is a map actually made by JNCC, where I used to work, which is responsible for mapping and looking after all of these. And the largest new west of Scotland MPA is actually the largest marine protected area in Europe, and it protects a diverse marine landscape, including these exciting sea mounts and things like that. You'll notice that there can also be various other things happening in these areas, so hence it's very important to conserve it. So very exciting last year, the Nature Restoration Law was passed, which is committed now to restoring Europe's degraded land and sea, and it's now been adopted. EU countries are required to restore at least 20% of habitats covered by the new law from poor to good condition by 2030. Again, you know, a very, very steep target. And then they intend to increase the percentage to 60% by 2040 and 90% by 2050. And that's just to show you the Natura 2000 logo, because up until 2030, the priority should be given to Natura 2000 areas, also known as SACs, Special Areas of Conservation. This is a network of protected areas that cover Europe's most valuable and threatened species and habitats on land and sea. Now, in those SACs are designated for the features. So you designate a special area of conservation based on features that you designate as being required, and they have to be in favorable condition to have that whole SAC in favorable condition. I've mentioned the importance about favorable condition and restoration. Now, these features, can we actually afford to monitor all of the UK's MPAs every 5 years? You've just seen 37% of our seabed is already protected. How on earth are we going to monitor this? Well, this is a paper from Brian Betts in Southampton, in which he's talking about monitoring using autonomous underwater vehicles. So things like automation, drones, underwater fleets of vehicles, those can help, but it's still going to be very difficult to do this in any meaningful way. Now, I'm going to talk about now designated features that actually are seaweed, because this talks about seaweed. So a designated feature of a particular SAC, which in this case, I'm going to talk about the Fowl and Helford SAC, that's down here in Cornwall. And the feature that's been designated is Merle, that's M-A-E-R-L. It forms what look like, I used to call them stone roses, particular species, very beautiful, very important for biodiversity, and very fragile. They can be damaged by trawling or any other impact. Now, this SAC, the Fowl and Helford, has been designated for its Merle beds, which were covered under something called sandbank, slightly covered by seawater all the time. It's a bit of a fudge. And the Merle beds there, particularly on St. Mawes Bank, are the largest beds in southwest Britain, and they're very, very rich for seaweeds. Now, the MPA designation under the Special Areas of Protection, SAC, it prevents removal of Merle for any reason. And this is because it would no longer be in favourable conditions, so you mustn't remove it. Now, the harbour, as in many cases, the harbour has multiple uses. And the local Falmouth Harbour plan was to dredge the harbour so they could bring in bigger cruise ships. The MMO, the Marine Management Organisation, which is the government's office for looking after these things, said dredging could harm Merle, and so no, they couldn't dredge their channel for their big ships to visit. And in fact, we showed it back in Belfast Lough that Merle beds in Belfast Lough were actually, they did go extinct just at the same time as there was channel dredging in the 1840s. And this is our paper here, which I cite using radiocarbon dating. That's an old picture of the harbour commissioners and what the Belfast harbour looked like in those days. So we thought that dredging is very dangerous to the Merle beds. And as I said, the Merle beds are highly protected. Well, Falmouth Harbour, the Chancellor, who in that year was George Osborne, he said that the dredging could start in 2013. And he said this in November 2011. And it was part of the master plan to encourage the cruise ships to visit the port. and it would create 800 jobs for Falmouth. Actually, talking about this, it does sort of remind us of them mocking this 100 million bat tunnel that's just been built. Everybody hates that. So you can say, here are seaweeds, and they're preventing the creation of 800 jobs. So you could see why not everyone thinks this is so great. George Osborne said confidently that the harbour dredging would start in 2013. But today is 2025. It didn't start in 2013, and it still hasn't started. And this was our work on the sediment from dredging, where merle that's on the surface of muddy sand. This is a photosynthesis. This is how alive the merle is. We collected it. We put it on sand. It was doing fine. And then over just 2 weeks, if you had muddy sand on the surface, if it was lying on the surface of it or not even buried at all, it immediately died. So it's completely toxic. We think it's the hydrogen sulfide in the mud. You know, when you get that black mud and it kind of smells of rotten eggs, that's hydrogen sulfide. So we think that is what was killing the merle. And so you can see that if you dredged the channel in Falmouth and you released that hydrogen sulfide, you probably would kill all the merle. And now, after this decision had been made by the MMO, it was discovered in a new genetic study using whole genome genotyping in Exeter University, and this is led by someone who's now in Natural England. These orange bars here is a particular element of the genetic diversity, a particular pattern. And you can see that this orange one is restricted to the fowl. And so, and that's how far out it is in a multivariate analysis from all the others. So the fowl does have unique genetic variation, and it's the fact that it was protected meant that this was not destroyed. If this whole merle bed had been destroyed, we would have lost not only unique genetic variation, but actually really quite divergent genetic variation. And for amusement, I have included a picture of myself diving here when I was an undergraduate. We went on an offshore cruise there in 1976. Now moving on to the next target. I've done target 3 there. Target 5, that the legal harvesting must be sustainable and safe. So the questions they ask in this are which species are harvested, what impacts are there, how could they be mitigated, and so on. And they say their headline indicators, this is the Kunming biodiversity, the headline indicator is that the proportion of fish stocks are within biologically sustainable levels. So fish, you'll be interested here, include plants and seaweeds. And the types of indicators that are used to determine this is the Red List Index, Living Planet Index, and sustainable use of wild species. So, are they being sustainably harvested? That is a key question. What does sustainable harvesting actually mean in the context of seaweeds? Well, if we look at seaweed, the use of seaweeds worldwide, wild harvested constitute less than 5% of the total global. The wild collection are these orange bars here. You can see there's almost no increase at all. Wild harvesting has been maintained at the same level, but aquaculture, which started in the 1950s, has been rapidly increasing. So here's this wild harvesting. It's going on at the same level it always has done. Is it sustainable? I'm going to discuss this in the context of 3 species. One is merle. The second one is a similar but different a calcified seaweed called corallina, looks like a coral, and ascophyllum, which is that knotted rack that I showed you earlier. So merle, that's the calcified seaweed. This picture of merle down here. Here's a picture of what it looks like when you break it open. And here's one where we stained using a stain that's used to determine whether corals are growing. And you put the merle into this stain. It's a living, vital stain. The merle carried on growing, so we could actually see how fast it's growing. It was very nice piece of work, obviously done by a student. Charmaine Blake did this. When I say obviously, it was a lot of work. It's full-time work for a year. Now, merle has always been harvested as a soil conditioner on a small scale in Galicia and in Brittany and in Western Ireland and Scotland. But later, more recently, enormous quantities were being industrially dredged for use in agriculture. So that's completely different. And in 1992, the Habitats Directive had included the most common species of merle under Annex 5. They're taking in the wild, and exploitation is subject to management measures. So under the Habitats Directive, which was then implemented domestically in the countries of the EU, including the UK, meant merle can no longer be harvested in the EU. It's not sustainable. Charmaine showed that growth rate was less than 1 millimetre a year. So you can see that there's no way that harvesting live individuals can be sustainable. Now, there is still a company that sells merle, Celtic Sea Minerals from Cork. Now, they do sell it, but they harvest it from subfossil beds. Now, what subfossil means is that they could have been growing 8,000 years ago. So that is legal. Merle can't be sustainably harvested, but can similar coralline algae be a sustainable source of ceramics, for example, for bone and dental implants? This is a project that we did with the University of Minho in Portugal, led by Rui Rice. And you need to be able to put inserts into the bone using sustainable ceramics. And at the moment, your choices, if you're a surgeon, are a bit gross, actually, that you have to use bits of bones from dead humans, cadavers. In fact, there was a big scandal where bones were being stolen from people. Some of you may even remember this. One of them was actually Alistair Cook, the famous Letter from America author. When he was buried, his long bones had actually been stolen, and there were scaffolding poles in the coffin. So this is pretty shocking. So they were looking for other ways to get ceramic material to put into the defects, as they're called, in bones. We know that although merle is used, it's not sustainable. So we started looking at these coralline seaweeds. This is corallina here, lives in every rock pool in Bournemouth and around Britain, Ireland, and much of the world. It has a diverse animal community. And so if you want to see, can we sustainably harvest it, you need to look at the animals as well. And that's what we did. So we went out on the shore here in Donegal, where I am. We harvested using an experimental design, corallina. We did it in different ways. We either pulled it right off, or we cut it with scissors at 1 centimetre or 3 centimetres length. And interestingly, when you did this, whichever way you did it, it significantly increased the growth rates. So the growth rate, compared to the control, this is the growth rate of less than 2 millimetres a month of the control. When you harvested it, it grows faster. So that's really helpful when you're trying to look for sustainability. That harvesting it actually increases growth rate. And after 4 months, there was no difference, no significant difference between the stuff that had been harvested and not harvested. So within just 4 months, the corallina had returned to a non-significantly different amount than before the harvesting. And what about animals? I said animals are, of course, really important for sustainability. We've got to look at the impacts on non-targeted species. And so we looked at the invertebrates, over time, and we actually found that over time there was no significant difference between the harvested and the controls. The controls are the open bars. So those of you, and for example, Dan, who are looking at this and know a lot about statistics will go, got quite big error bars, haven't you? Yes, we did have big error bars, but this has been properly statistically analysed. And so we can confidently say that harvesting corallina is sustainable. And in fact, there is a company that sells corallina for bone and dental replacements. And we don't know where they harvest it. They're very secretive. Next species I'm going to mention is the knotted rack, Ascophyllum, that I held up in the beginning. It's a valuable fishery. These are pictures from the 1960s. It's very quaint to think that in the west of Ireland, this is what chaps looked like in the 1960s in Connemara with their lovely flat hats. And here they were cutting seaweeds, they were piling them onto their little boats, and then they were transporting them for sale. It's a traditional industry. Here it is, here's the ASCO, here's them cutting it, and it was managed according to traditional seaweed rights. And the thalli were cut and at least 30 centimetres regrew. So in Nova Scotia, on the other side of the Atlantic, they did start at one point harvesting it mechanically here using these cutters, but actually they've returned to hand harvesting again. And the hand harvesting is strictly controlled. These coloured areas here on the map of Nova Scotia show the areas that the government monitors. They've divided it into parcels. It's very, very highly controlled. So this is good because it means we can be very comfortable that it is sustainable harvesting. And that's important because it's got a very high market price with multiple uses in horticulture and animal feed. In Ireland and in New Brunswick, it's harvested at 17% of standing stock per annum, up to Nova Scotia. Apparently they can take a third of the standing stock per annum, which amounts to this much of dry weight, 84,000 tonnes. But in Portugal, which is at the southern end of its range, it can't be harvested at all. It's not sustainable. So Ascophyllum nodosum fisheries are sustainable in much of its range, hence meeting that criterion of the Kunming. It's based on productivity, and actually productivity estimates have been increased recently. And one of the things is that the reproductive structures here, these paler structures, these are shed every year, washed up on the beach like here. And in Strangford, we found that there was no detrimental effect after 21 years, so long-term effects. And really, as long as you don't remove the holdfasts, you mustn't completely clear fell and would be disastrous. Limpets are the main predator. Now, moving on to target 9, so we've shown that that harvesting can be sustainable. What about to benefit people? And this is about sustainable use by Indigenous peoples and local communities, those most dependent on biodiversity. And the headline indicators regard the benefits from the sustainable use and percentage of the population in traditional occupations. And of course, there is a considerable overlap with target 5. But I've taken the liberty here in a slightly humorous way of saying that in Britain and Ireland, it's the foragers who are those people. The foragers and other artisanal users of seaweed biodiversity, artisanal or artisanal, some people say each. Amazingly, in England, floating seaweed can be collected at high tide as fishing. Small-scale collection requires the consent of the competent authority only in protected areas, otherwise only the landowner. And this is one of my favourite foragers, John Renston, who is near you in Wareham. That's me assisting him and teaching them how to identify seaweeds. These are some of the seaweeds that are targets for them. This one is called, they call it sea spaghetti, and this one here is used in flavoring gin and such like. It's called Osmundia. So they take it, and of course they care about their environment. They are part of the local community, and they're not going to overharvest. And there is now, I'm glad to say, there's actually some scientific evidence that it is sustainable. This is in West Wales here, this seaweed called Porphyra, otherwise known as nori. They call it black lava in Wales. And here, there was no significant differences between the group that was the control, the darker bars here, and the harvested bars. So harvesting the black lava doesn't affect it at all. So we can confidently say that this kind of foraging is sustainable. It is, and it supports local communities. Obviously, if things went too far and everyone decided they were a forager or started selling them in a larger scale, that would be different. Now, 10 is enhanced biodiversity, target 10. And we got to see sustainable management, sustainable use of biodiversity, and got to take into account things like food security, ecosystem functions, and services. And the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy selected seaweed farming as one of 5 possible nature-based solutions for mitigating climate change. So this was their big paper, The Ocean as a Solution to Climate Change. So this really put the idea of seaweeds onto a very high level in terms of public consciousness. And everyone wanted to be in on it, carbon capture by seaweeds. So this is an example here of a company called Running Tide. They raised $50 million from Silicon Valley funders. Carbon removal was purchased by companies including Stripe and Microsoft. What Running Tide said they were going to do is to make little buoys, or as they call them, buoys, spray kelp spores on them, drop them in the ocean, they would float around, they would form little mini floating kelp forests, and then they'd sink to the bottom of the ocean. All the carbon stored in that freshly grown kelp would sink too and remain on the sea floor for hundreds of years, i.e. blue carbon, CO2 mitigation. The CEO of the company told us all about it, and he said, pretty simple, right? Well, no, actually it wasn't. And seaweeds aren't simple, and anyone who thinks they're going to get rich quick from a seaweed needs to think again. So Phil Boyd, who's a marine geochemist, actually, he was formerly a student at Queen's University Belfast. He's now in Tasmania. He explained that ocean waters far offshore lack the necessary nutrients for kelp farming. So if your little pebble with kelp on it floated off into the open ocean, it would probably die of starvation before anything worse happened to it. And the scientists who look at seabed ecology weren't very encouraging either. So this story that it was released to us, the backstory on what had happened was released by Canary Media, Clean Energy Journalism for a Cooler Tomorrow. It looks great. And Running Tide has now ceased operations. I'm not, it sounds like I'm crowing about this. I'm not really, it's great that they had a go, but the problem is it's just not realistic. A bit more mainstream, temperate aquaculture of kelps requiring seabed licensing from the Crown Estate can produce high yields. This again is at Queen's. This is Karen Mooney growing our seaweed, and this seaweed can be used in anaerobic digestion. Now in Europe, seaweed farms are seen as providing ecosystem services, potential benefit to fisheries, and here they're providing jobs for fishermen. So we see our seaweed as very benign and beneficial, but it's very hard to get licenses. And there's been a big row in Padstow in Cornwall. People don't like the idea of it. Marine spatial planning shows how crowded these areas are. And the right kind of public consultation is essential. Now, in Southeast Asia, there are enormous seaweed farms, and there has been a little assessment of their environmental impact. But I'm absolutely delighted to say that finally, after having had the blue carbon credentials of seaweeds challenged, what blue carbon is, by the way, is that it's carbon that's been captured from the atmosphere, and it has to be locked away or sequestered for at least 100 years, and it has to be additional to what would be going on naturally. So the blue carbon credentials of seaweeds have been challenged very heavily. I think a lot of us who work on seaweeds weren't really happy about this. Anyway, I'm delighted to say that our hero, Carlos Duarte, a really big shot, has, with a big team of people, he's been able to show, by researching those old seaweed farms in Southeast Asia, that the carbon burial matches that of blue carbon habitats. The longer the farm has been in operation, the more carbon has accumulated under them. Now, I possibly am running out of time, Julian. Can I do 5 more minutes, or should I stop?
No, go for it. Yeah, 5 more minutes, then we'll have 10 for Q&A. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, brilliant. This, as far as I'm concerned, this is a very exciting moment. It should have been in Nature. I don't know why it's not in Nature. That's not good. It's in Nature Climate Change anyway, which is an excellent journal. So I'm going to talk briefly now about another, I mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which obviously underpin a lot of what we do at the moment. Number 14 is life below water, and life below water specifically mentions coastal eutrophication and algal blooms. So part of the most spectacular algal blooms are called green tides. One of them nearly terminated the Qingdao Summer Olympics because it completely filled the sea. There was millions and millions of tons of this green seaweed was washed up on the shore. So these are vast accumulations. And there's such a problem that there is even a movie about them. This is a French movie called Les Algues Vertes. And not less than 3 men and 40 animals were found dead on Breton beaches. The young journalist sets off to investigate. I can't tell you the answer because I haven't been able to see the film yet. It hasn't come out on Netflix or anything, as far as I know. The green tides, they are usually caused by eutrophication due to nutrients from agriculture. And yes, that movie here, the Brittany area, is where there is a great deal of pig farming. So here's this really nice looking pig, but those many pig farms cover 60% of the area of Denmark is under agriculture, 13 million pigs a year, eutrophication is being caused and so on. So we've got these green tides. But those green tides are a cheap source of biomass. You can collect the green tide and you can remove the nutrients and improve the ecosystem. Similarly with reds, this is in Ireland, but this is in Christchurch in Dorset, where if you leave them to rot, you can see a black footprint here. That's the hydrogen sulfide. And these reds can equally be removed and taken away for a product. And the company that I'm currently working for, Ocean Harvest, we use a blend of these seaweeds collected from green tides, waste gracilaria, a red seaweed, but also sustainably harvested ascophyllum. And that's why I'm so interested in sustainable harvesting. Now, I did mention everybody who thinks they're going to get rich quick with seaweeds, there are a lot of them out there. The great Atlantic Sargassum bloom, you've probably heard of it. It can be seen from space. It covers hundreds of square miles. It's there every year at the moment. It washes ashore in the Caribbean. Massive carpet of seaweed visible from space threatens US beaches. Here's a startup company with a mission to restore balance to the ecosystems of coastal areas. They're going to harvest this. They're going to harvest this Sargassum, which can be a gold mine, maybe a gold mine, but there's one little challenge here. It's full of arsenic that cannot be removed. So I'm helping, actually. I'm supplying Sargassum to some people in Brunel University who are trying to remove the arsenic. If we could remove the arsenic, that would be brilliant, and then we could use it. You could use that Sargassum to clean up the ocean and hopefully to make a valuable product. And finally, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. Thanks, Pippa, for asking me and the Centre for the invitation to kick off this season's talks. Thanks, Julian, for hosting me today. And I want to mention Tim Darvill, who, this is his obituary from The Guardian. Tim was a very, very well-known professor of archaeology in Bournemouth. He was truly an inspiration to all who interacted with him. But despite the fact that Tim was an archaeologist, he actually was also interested in algae. And he explained to me how the freshwater algae on the drying flints that lived in the little streams around Stonehenge, probably the way that they turned this magical cerise colour when they dried, encouraged Neolithic man to invest the site of Stonehenge with mythical significance. So I'll thank you all, and thank Tim, and sort of think about his memory when I'm giving a talk at BU, even if it is online. So hopefully what do I do now?
Thank you. So if you stop sharing in the bottom of the screen, you've got the option. Then we'll be able to take questions and see you. I can probably
stop sharing.
That's it. Yeah, excellent.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for that. We don't have questions in the chat, but we do have a raised hand. So I'm going to go first of all to Sinead.
Thanks, Christine, for that. In your images there for the algal blooms that you're looking at harvesting, there seem to be a lot of old stuff, new stuff, maybe some degrading stuff. Do you have to sort through that, or how does that work? Do you separate it out?
Yeah. Are you talking about like the Gracilaria that was down in Christchurch Harbour?
I mean, that's what I'm interested in myself specifically, but it could also apply to even the Sargassum or...
No, you're completely right. And when they are being harvested for a purpose, such as being turned into animal feed, they're harvested in a particular way. In fact, they don't let them wash ashore. They take a boat out and they put them onto the boat before it ever reaches the coast. And so it doesn't start going bad and it doesn't start getting sand in, because sand is very bad when you're going to do milling. It damages things. So yes, you're completely right. Those are the bad green tides that you see there, the bad red tides, the ones that have come ashore and started rotting.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. We have a question from Kat Campbell. Kat.
That's this is my mum. My question, I'm an environmental lawyer. I'm interested in the use of seaweed as a kind of carbon sink, and you said that the running tide project wasn't viable because I guess the science wasn't there for it. But now that that paper in Nature Climate Change has shown that seaweed can be used as a kind of carbon sink, do you think that that's going to lead to more projects? And do you have examples of projects where it is viable or successful?
Right. So up to now, there is no carbon credit scheme based on seaweeds, unless anyone corrects me. I don't believe there is. I think this was an early attempt, that running tide one, which obviously failed completely. But now that we have got this evidence that the kelp farms can actually capture carbon, I think that's going to make it much easier for seaweed farms to start developing carbon credits. And at the same time, clearly they have to minimize their carbon footprint of the kelp farm. So you have to use the right kind of materials, you have to use the right kind of transport. And you mustn't have your salesman driving around in big American cars. When we did the carbon footprint for our company, Ocean Harvest, actually that was the main part of our carbon footprint, was the American salesman. And they didn't sell any either. So yeah, I do think this is an important step. We're not there yet, but I think it's a good way for us to get a step towards getting carbon credits. And then I've also mentioned the difficulty with marine spatial planning and actually getting permission for seaweed farms in Britain and Ireland, but I think it is coming.
Thank you. We had, I think, Daniel next, and then Robin and Judith just going on the Zoom names on the screen. So Daniel next, please.
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for that. Just talking about carbon credits there, I wondered if you had any perspective on nutrient credits, given the interest from some quarters in using seaweed to deliberately extract nutrients. I was interested in that project in New Zealand, which I came across recently in the Firth of Thames, where they're growing ulva in the river, or just as the river outflows into a eutrophic estuary, whether you see any possibilities or benefits of that for the UK, given we have quite a few highly eutrophic estuaries.
Yeah, that's a great idea, but we don't have nutrient credits yet, do we, Dan?
We have nutrient trading, but nothing marine-based or aquatic-based. So that's an area of development, potentially.
I could see it. I mean, there's absolutely very, very good evidence that the ulva does remove nitrate, nitrogen, phosphorus, nitrate phosphates. And if you take them ashore and use them, yeah, I mean, that's what they're hoping to do in Denmark. That woman from Aarhus University I showed you, she's an author of that paper by Duarte as well. Mm-hmm. And their plan is to get this as part of the circular economy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that there is definitely scope for that too. And one of the questions I've been asked in the past is, well, are we going to run out of green tides? If you start harvesting them, will they run out? And I'm afraid not at any time soon.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Robin and Judith.
Oh, hi, hi, Chris. So good to see you. So yeah, thanks for a wide-ranging talk. As you've highlighted, there's a lot of interest in seaweed farming around the UK with a number of licensed applications. And you've mentioned some of the issues around kind of inadequate or inappropriate public consultation. Given the interest, what do you think are the key environmental impacts that we should be concerned about?
Well, the ones that everyone thinks about first are, what if the seaweed farm is destroyed by a storm? So think about all the plastic waste that's going into the sea. So then you start going, well, in that case, let's use hemp ropes. Well, it turns out that hemp ropes rot in less than a year. So then all your seabed anchors get marooned. One of my friends has been spending months trying to locate seabed anchors that got that were lost because the hemp rope broke. But I think there are stronger natural fibers. So I think the plastic pollution, that is an important one. Obviously, you've got to be careful not to damage the migration routes of sea mammals and such like, damage their lifestyles. But they're very heavily protected anyway. And as far as I'm concerned, just about every dolphin or seal in the UK has got a satellite tracker on it. So I think it will be known if they come to any harm. Obviously visual appearance is important, but I don't think people should be allowed to say that I like my bit of seascape and I like it without seaweed farms, and so I can't. There are cabinet seaweed farms, sort of NIMBY or not in my not in my back bay, nimb.
Which some of it appears to be, a chunk of it appears to be.
I think some of it is, I really do. I mean, I have not forgotten in Bournemouth having a serious argument in our local, what do you call them, residents association, with people who didn't want offshore wind farms because they'd be able to see them from Hengistbury Head. And I thought, okay, so you'd rather that I get a nuclear power station in my garden. So I think, you know, let's be aware that the feelings run very high, and you have to get people on board using the right kind of social tools to communicate with them.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Thank you. So we are now at the end of our time. We do have 3 other questions, but we are quite strict about finishing on time with these talks because people have other commitments, and also because we don't want to take up more time than our speakers already generously give to us. So perhaps one way forward would be for the 3 people who had questions, if they would like to contact Christine, if that's okay with you, Christine.
I'm just wondering, the chat's going to disappear now, though. When we
okay, I'm gonna, in that case, hang on a second. First of all, I'm going to thank you and stop recording, and then I'll stay on for a few minutes to make sure that you get those questions. So thank you so much, Christine, for your time, for everybody in the call for having such an engaging conversation at the end. And I'm going to stop the recording now.